Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Our mission here is simple. We crack open complex sources, pull out the core knowledge, and give you the key insights.
And today, we're tackling a document that, well, it's probably the most widely spread political text in modern history.
That's right. We're talking about quotations from Chairman Mao Tse-tung. Everyone knows it as the Little Red Book.
Yeah, and it's a really significant source because it's not just, philosophy. It's really a manual.
Yeah.
It was published heavily between 64 and 76, right, during the Cultural Revolution.
Billions of copies, apparently.
Billions. All designed the same way, small, bright red, easy to carry around. And the quotes themselves, they cover a huge span, almost 4 decades, from 1927 all the way up to 64.
So what you're holding is basically an operating system.
Yeah.
For revolution and for building a whole new kind of state.
That's a good way to put it. An operating system for perpetual revolution and, constructing a new society.
And the gravity of it, politically speaking, is obvious right from the start, from that 1966 foreword by Lin Piao. It wasn't just like recommended reading, was it?
Oh, no, not at all. It was presented as mandated ideological armament. That introduction, it lays out the purpose very clearly.
Which was?
Well, it puts Mao Tse-tung's thought right at the top. The supreme guiding principle, calls it the Marxism-Leninism of the era. And the goal, explicit, total, to arm the minds of the people throughout the country with this one single way of thinking.
Arm the minds, wow.
And the power they thought this would unleash. It's described with this almost religious intensity. Lin Piao actually claims that once the masses grasp Mao's thought, it becomes this inexhaustible source of strength and a spiritual atom bomb of infinite power.
A spiritual atom bomb. I mean, that phrase alone tells you this book was meant as a weapon, right? A mass mobilization tool. The ideology itself was kinetic energy.
Exactly. It suggests that mental clarity, the right thinking, is actually more powerful than guns or tanks.
So how were people supposed to use it? Just read it?
No, much more than that. This is where the practice comes in. The foreword is specific. You don't just read. You study selected quotations with specific problems in mind. You apply them creatively. You combine study with application. And you have to memorize the important bits.
So theory into action. Immediately.
Right. And that's really our task in this deep dive, isn't it? To sort of follow that instruction, to systematically look at the key parts of this ideology, how it defines power, conflict, how you govern, all based on what's in these pages.
Okay, let's unpack this political operating system, starting with what seems like the absolute center of it all in Chapter 1, the Communist Party. It's not just like part of the government here. It sounds like the essential ingredient for anything to happen.
It's presented as the unavoidable core. Yeah, the source says it straight out. The force at the core leading our cause forward is the Chinese Communist Party, and it has to be guided strictly by Marxism-Leninism.
And without it?
The argument is that independence, liberation, even modernizing farming and industry later on, it's all impossible without this specific, highly disciplined revolutionary party. It's framed as the brain, maybe the central nervous system, for the entire nation.
And to make sure this core is protected and can project power, the text talks about 3 main weapons for defeating the enemy. But these aren't just guns, are they? They sound more organizational.
That's a crucial point. They're organizational and intellectual, and they're completely linked. You can't separate them. First weapon, a well-disciplined party itself. It has to be armed with theory, constantly using self-criticism, and deeply connected to the masses.
Okay, number 1.
The party.
Number 2, an army. But, and this is critical, only an army that is completely under the party's leadership.
Right. The party controls the gun. We'll come back to that. And the third?
A united front, bringing together all the revolutionary classes and groups.
Yeah.
But again, that united front must also be led by the party.
So if the party's the brain, the army is the fist, and the united front is sort of the broad shoulders, the support base. That's a good analogy. And the system demands that interdependence. If the army drifts from party control, or if the party itself loses its theoretical focus, the whole thing supposedly falls apart.
Which leads to those 2 cardinal principles mentioned.
Exactly. Absolute faith in the masses and absolute faith in the party. The text argues if you doubt either one, you achieve nothing. It demands this unwavering trust in the leadership, which is itself empowered by the people.
Okay, so the party is central. Then comes the role of policy. Why is policy framed as so fundamental, not just strategy, but like the lifeblood of the party?
Because policy is defined as both the starting point and the end result of all revolutionary action. Every single thing a party member or organization does, whether they realize it or not, is seen as executing a policy.
So there's a difference between the big picture and the details.
Right. They distinguish between the general line or policy, that's the grand strategy, the overall direction, and the specific lines or policies, which are the tactics applied in, say, one province or one factory.
And if you lose sight of that big picture, the general line,
the text says the cost is catastrophic. You become a blind, half-baked, muddle-headed revolutionary.
that sounds like a serious insult in this context.
It is. It means you might be busy working hard on local stuff, but if you've forgotten the overall strategic goal, your actions don't add up. You get pushed around, you make bad calls, you end up serving some immediate need, but undermining the long-term revolution.
So policy isn't optional.
No, the source demands that policy and tactics are treated as the life of the party. Leaders have to give them full attention, constantly. It's the roadmap. It ensures everyone's pulling in the same direction.
This focus on correctness, on testing things, it brings us to the philosophical core, doesn't it? The Marxist ideas about practice and materialism. This isn't just abstract thought. It shapes how revolutionaries are supposed to learn and adapt.
Absolutely. It's their epistemology, how they understand knowledge itself. The core argument is that all knowledge comes from social practice.
It means
It means being involved in three key struggles: the struggle for production, the class struggle, and scientific experiment. If you haven't done these things, your knowledge is seen as incomplete, maybe even wrong.
so learning by doing, basically.
That's essentially, yes. The source insists all genuine knowledge originates in direct experience.
And they use that very simple analogy, right, about the pear.
They do. It's very down to earth. If you want to know what a pear tastes like, you have to change the pear by eating it yourself. You can't just read about it or be told about it. That direct experience, tasting, struggling, doing, is the foundation.
But it doesn't stop there. The philosophy talks about 2 leaps needed to confirm if an idea is actually true. Can you walk us through those? Especially the second one, which sounds politically complicated.
Sure. The first leap is from that direct experience, that practice, to forming concepts. So you eat the pear, you gather sensory data, and you form the idea, this pear is sweet. That's moving from perceptual knowledge to conceptual knowledge, theories, policies, ideas, the analytical step.
Okay, practice to theory. What's the second leap?
The second leap is the crucial one for testing truth. It's taking that conceptual knowledge, that theory or policy, and applying it back to social practice. Does it work? Does it achieve the predicted results? If your theory, this pear is sweet, holds up when others taste it, or when you use that knowledge to, say, judge other pears, then it's considered closer to the truth.
But what happens if the theory doesn't work when you apply it back? If the policy fails in practice? That sounds risky politically.
Well, according to this framework, failure isn't just possible, it's essential for learning. Failure is seen as proof that your idea didn't actually match the objective laws of the real world. There's that quote, "A fall into the pit, a gain in your wit."
So failure forces you to rethink.
Exactly. It forces correction, adaptation. The text stresses that conditions are changing all the time, so your thinking must constantly adapt through more study and more testing. Holding on to an idea that reality has disproven, that's failing the second leap. It means Marxist theory can't be dogma. It has to be a flexible guide to action, used creatively to solve real problems.
Okay, so knowledge comes from practice and testing ideas in the real world. And the main arena for that practice, according to the book, seems to be conflict. The whole worldview is built on historical materialism, on class identity. What's the driving force of history here?
The fundamental truth as presented is constant struggle. Classes struggle, some classes triumph, others are eliminated. That's it. History is this conflict. And in any society with classes, the book insists every kind of thinking, whether it's art, philosophy, science, it's inevitably stamped with the brand of a class. You can't be neutral.
And in China specifically, who does the text say was really driving historical change?
It pins it squarely on the peasants. The actual real motive force in Chinese feudal society, it argues, was the ongoing class struggles of the peasants, their uprisings, their wars. They were the engine constantly disrupting the old order.
What's really striking is how this class lens is used to interpret everything, even conflicts between nations.
It does, yeah. The text argues that national struggle, at its root, is always a matter of class struggle. It gives the example of the United States claiming the oppression of Black people wasn't the fault of, say, white workers or farmers, but specifically the white reactionary ruling circles.
So it strategically frames all opposition, internal or external, as coming from this reactionary elite that needs to be overthrown.
Precisely. And it clarifies what revolution is. It's defined explicitly as an act of violence by which one class overthrows another. It makes sure nobody forgets the brutal, non-negotiable core of it. It's definitely not, as the famous quote goes, a dinner party.
This sets up a world clearly divided, friends versus enemies. And the book says figuring out who is the question of first importance. How does it break that down?
It's the political compass, really. The leading force is identified as the industrial proletariat. Their closest allies, their friends, are the semi-proletariat and the petty bourgeoisie. And the enemies. Anyone tied to imperialism. That means warlords, corrupt officials, big landlords, and the comprador class, the ones who serve foreign interests.
And there's that rather intense psychological test mentioned about drawing a clear line, the demarcation line.
Yes, that's where the logic gets really stark. The text actually asserts that if a party or an army or even a school isn't being attacked by the enemy, well, that's suspicious. It might mean they've compromised or sunk to the enemy's level.
So being attacked is good.
According to this view, yes. It's considered good if the enemy attacks you, because it proves you've drawn that clear line of demarcation. If the enemy attacks us wildly and paints us as utterly black, that's seen as evidence you're doing things right.
But isn't that potentially dangerous? Couldn't that encourage provoking conflict just to prove you're still revolutionary regardless of the actual situation?
From the perspective of this source material, that conflict is inevitable anyway, because the enemy inherently opposes revolutionary progress. So if they're attacking, you must be on the right track. It reinforces that core principle. Support whatever the enemy opposes and oppose whatever the enemy supports. It's a doctrine built on sharp polarization. No room for compromise.
But the fight doesn't stop when the shooting stops, does it? The source warns about a different kind of enemy that emerges right after military victory.
That's right. The battle shifts to the enemies without guns. This means internal ideological opposition. After the armed enemies are gone, these internal opponents are still there, and they're bound to struggle desperately. The text stresses this ideological fight between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie will be long and tortuous, maybe even very acute at times. It's a battle over whose worldview shapes the future, and the book warns this is still not really settled even after you win the war.
Okay, so struggle is constant, external, and internal. How does the system propose handling conflict within the revolutionary ranks, among the people themselves? This brings us to that key idea about different types of contradictions.
This is really the operational manual for governing after taking power. It divides contradictions into two main types. First, those between us and the enemy. These are antagonistic. Think proletariat versus bourgeoisie before the revolution. They're seen as fundamentally irreconcilable and have to be resolved through force, through revolution and suppression.
Okay, antagonistic means conflict. What about the other type?
The second type are contradictions among the people. These are generally non-antagonistic. Examples would be disagreements within the working class, or maybe friction between the government and an individual citizen, or between leaders and the people they lead.
And how are those supposed to be handled? No violence there.
Definitely not. For non-antagonistic contradictions, the method must be democratic. Discussion, criticism, persuasion, and education. Coercion is explicitly forbidden here. The assumption is that fundamentally the people's basic interests align, so disagreements come from misunderstandings, mistakes, or lack of education, not from core class opposition.
But there's one really tricky exception mentioned. The national bourgeoisie. Their relationship with the workers is exploitative, so it should be antagonistic, right? But the text suggests treating it as non-antagonistic, if handled properly. Why the flexibility there?
That's a fascinating point of political strategy, born from the reality of China's situation at the time, a relatively backward economy. Yes, the contradiction between the working class, exploited, and the national bourgeoisie, exploiters, is antagonistic by its nature. However, this class also had skills, technical knowledge, maybe capital, that were seen as vital for modernizing the country quickly for socialist construction.
So they were useful, basically, temporarily.
Essentially, yes. Their utility allowed for a political maneuver. The party aimed to transform the contradiction, make it non-antagonistic, by applying a policy of uniting with, criticizing, and educating them. Let them contribute while slowly trying to reform their class outlook.
But it wasn't a permanent alliance.
No, the text is clear. If they resisted reform, if they tried to undermine the state, then that contradiction would flip right back to being antagonistic and suppression would follow. It was a highly strategic, conditional alliance based on practical needs.
And to help leaders navigate all this internal complexity, figuring out right from wrong among the people, The text gives those 6 criteria. Which ones are the most important?
Right. The 6 criteria are presented as tests for whether any word or action is correct. They include things like helping to unite people, being good for socialist construction, strengthening the dictatorship, supporting democratic centralism, and helping international socialist unity. Help the socialist path, and does it strengthen the leadership of the Communist Party? If something fails those 2 tests, it's fundamentally wrong, no matter what other good it might seem to do.
Okay, let's shift from the theory and internal dynamics to the strategy for revolution itself. This ideology is incredibly direct about the link between military power and political control. It's almost brutally simple.
It leaves absolutely no room for doubt. War is defined as politics with bloodshed. It's the ultimate form of struggle when other means don't work. And the core truth, the one revolutionaries must grasp, is political power grows out of the barrel of a gun.
That's the foundation.
It's presented as the fundamental law. The army is the chief component of state power, and the claim is bold. Only with guns can the whole world be transformed.
But there seems to be a paradox here. How does a system aiming for ultimate peace justify such constant, often brutal conflict?
They resolve that paradox, or attempt to, by arguing that the only way to finally abolish war is to oppose war with war. Specifically, revolutionary war against counter-revolutionary war.
So fighting fire with fire, essentially.
Kind of. The claim is that communists study war only so they can eliminate all wars. They contrast themselves with exploiters who supposedly study war just to keep fighting and conquering. So revolutionary violence is framed as this necessary temporary tool to reach an ultimate future era of peace, once classes and states are gone.
Within the military strategy, we get that very famous concept for dealing with powerful enemies, the paper tiger. It seems to involve looking at the enemy in 2 different ways at once.
The paper tiger idea is absolutely central for morale and strategy. It defines this dual nature of reactionaries, of imperialism. Strategically taking the long view, the historical perspective, they are paper tigers.
Why paper?
Because, the argument goes, they're disconnected from the people, their system is fundamentally rotten, and history is inevitably going to sweep them away. Examples given include Hitler, the Tsar, even U.S. imperialism regardless of their current military strength, even nuclear bombs. They're doomed in the long run.
But despising them strategically doesn't mean you can ignore them in a fight.
Absolutely not. That's the other side. Tactically, in the here and now, on the actual battlefield, they are still living tigers, iron tigers, real tigers. They absolutely can devour people.
So you need a dual approach.
Exactly. You have to despise the enemy overall, strategically, to avoid becoming defeatist or opportunistic. But you must take them very seriously in every specific, concrete situation, tactically, to avoid being reckless or adventurous. Mentally, you neutralize their perceived power. Physically, you prepare for their maximum strength.
The text uses some great analogies for this, right? About patience.
Yeah, it compares winning the revolution to eating a big meal. You can't swallow the whole thing at once. You have to go mouthful by mouthful. Militarily, that translates into fighting for piecemeal solutions, wiping out the enemy forces one by one. It all rests on that conviction that the east wind is prevailing over the west wind, that the tide of history is overwhelmingly on socialism's side.
Okay, so that's the mindset. What about the actual conduct of war? The idea of people's war? The text frames this less as a military technique and more as a political reality. Where does the real power come from in this model?
Revolutionary war is explicitly called a war of the masses. That's the richest source of power. The real fortress, the true bastion of iron, isn't made of stone or steel. It's the millions upon millions of people who genuinely and sincerely support the revolution. Without that massive popular backing, the army is essentially helpless.
And the specific tactics, the operational principles of people's war, they seem designed for fighting an enemy with better equipment, right? Can we look at those rules, especially the one about needing overwhelming force in battles?
Right. The principles prioritize political and strategic goals over just holding territory. They tell the army, first, attack the enemy's scattered, weaker forces. Second, focus on taking small and medium cities and the countryside first, leave the big, heavily defended cities for later. Third, the main goal isn't just capturing ground. It's wiping out the enemy's effective strength, their soldiers, their commanders.
And that rule about concentration needing like 6 times the enemy's strength, it seems like more than just winning, that's annihilation. What's the thinking there?
The goal is guaranteed. total destruction in every single encounter. By massing an absolutely superior force 2, 3, 4, even 6 times what the enemy has in one specific battle, you achieve a couple of things. First, you ensure that enemy unit is completely wiped out, permanently reducing their overall strength. Second, you minimize your own casualties by avoiding drawn-out battles of attrition.
So win decisively, piece by piece.
Exactly. Annihilate the enemy bit by bit while carefully preserving your own forces. That's how you build overall superiority over time. The object of war is stated as twofold: to preserve oneself and destroy the enemy. But destroying the enemy is primary because that's seen as the only reliable way to preserve yourself in the long run.
All right, once the strategy for conflict is set, we need to look at governance, the mass line. This is put forward as the core leadership method for connecting the party with the people, making sure the revolution stays grounded.
Yeah, this is the practical definition of what they call democratic centralism in action. It's summed up as from the masses to the masses. It's meant to be this continuous self-correcting cycle of learning and acting. It involves 4 key steps that have to be repeated over and over.
Let's break down that cycle. The first step sounds tricky, getting ideas from the masses. How do they filter that?
Well, step 1 is to gather the scattered, often unsystematic ideas from the people. And yeah, that's the challenge. The masses will have all sorts of opinions, some correct, some wrong, some forward-thinking, some backward. The leader, the cadre, needs the political insight to pick out the genuinely useful ideas, the ones that reflect objective reality and the people's long-term interests, and separate them from, just individual gripes or outdated thinking.
That initial stage requires a lot of ideological clarity from the leader.
It does. Then step 2 is where the party's theory comes in. They take these scattered ideas and concentrate them, systematize them, turn them into a coherent policy or theory.
Could gather, then synthesize. What's next?
Step 3 is to take this refined idea back to the masses. Propagate it, explain it, persuade people until they embrace them as their own and are willing to act on them voluntarily.
And the final step.
Step 4 is testing that policy in action, seeing how it works in practice. Then the whole cycle starts again, refining the ideas further based on the results. It's meant to be an upward spiral, getting more correct each time.
It sounds participatory, but the text warns about 2 big mistakes that can break that party-people link: commandism and tailism. What are those?
These are presented as the fatal errors in using the mass line. Commandism is basically being too hasty. It means pushing policies or actions before the people are ready, before they understand or agree. You're violating that principle of voluntary action. Think of a general getting way too far ahead of their troops. The troops just won't follow.
Okay, so pushing too hard, what's tailism?
Tailism is the opposite problem, being too slow, too hesitant. It's lagging behind when the masses are actually ready for change. It might happen if leaders mistake the views of conservative minority for the majority opinion, or if they wait too long for everyone to agree, missing the right moment for action.
So it's a balancing act.
A very difficult one.
Yeah.
Leaders have to start from the actual needs and wishes of the masses, but they can't just follow the most backward elements. They need to lead, but not outrun their base.
And this mass line idea, it applies to the military too, right? The army isn't just about fighting.
Absolutely. The army is seen as an extension of the people. There's that famous line, "Without a people's army, the people have nothing." Its only purpose is supposed to be serving the people wholeheartedly, fighting for their interests. And critically, the army has a dual function.
Meaning?
It's a fighting force, yes, but it's also supposed to be an army for labor and production. It has to contribute to building the economy, farming, infrastructure, reinforcing that self-reliance idea.
Which ties into the frugality we'll touch on. But politically, the ultimate control stays civilian.
Non-negotiable. That's the principle. The party commands the gun. The gun must never be allowed to command the party. And that control is maintained through intense ideological work called political work. It's described as the lifeblood of everything the army does, and even economic work, too.
What does political work involve?
It's about ensuring unity within the army, fostering good relations between soldiers and civilians, and even weakening the enemy, things like promoting lenient treatment of prisoners to win them over. It keeps the army politically aligned and motivated.
Okay, finally in this section, let's talk about the people who have to implement all this. The cadres. The text calls them the decisive factor once the political direction is set. That's a huge burden, especially regarding who comes next. Ideological succession.
Yeah, the quality of the cadres is seen as make or break. And there's a massive emphasis on training successors. Why? Specifically to prevent what they term Khrushchev's revisionism. There's this deep fear that the revolution will lose its way, get corrupted, abandon class struggle.
So what makes a good successor? What are the requirements to keep them ideologically pure?
Well, first, they have to be genuine Marxist-Leninists. They must serve the overwhelming majority of people, not just a small group. They need to be able to unite with everyone, even people they disagreed with before, as long as those people prove loyal in practice. They have to master the mass line, use democratic centralism, constantly practice self-criticism, and be modest, guard against arrogance.
And there's one very practical thing demanded of them to keep them grounded, linked back to the mass line.
Yes, absolutely crucial. To fight bureaucracy and prevent revisionism, cadres must regularly participate in collective, productive labor.
Meaning physical work.
Exactly. Working alongside peasants and workers. This does two things. It's supposed to reduce the social gap between leaders and led, and it forces cadres to stay in direct touch with reality, with social practice. It stops them from becoming, as the text warns, overlords sitting on the backs of the people.
This constant battle against becoming bureaucratic or revisionist leads right into the internal mechanisms for correction. The main one seems to be criticism and self-criticism. It's presented less as punishment and more like necessary maintenance.
Yeah, like hygiene for the party. It's highlighted as a key feature that distinguishes the Communist Party from others. The comparison used is striking. It's like washing your face every day or sweeping dust out of a room. You have to do it constantly to prevent political dust and germs from building up and making the party sick. Conscientious self-criticism isn't optional, it's mandatory.
But the goal isn't just to find fault, right? It's linked to unity and saving the person involved.
That's the stated principle. Learn from past mistakes to avoid future ones, and really importantly, cure the sickness to save the patient. The idea is that criticism should be like a doctor's intervention, reasoned, analytical, convincing. You're trying to help the comrade correct their mistake and rejoin the ranks, not destroy them with personal attacks or overly harsh methods.
Because mistakes are inevitable.
Mistakes are seen as inevitable, yes. But they have to be corrected quickly and thoroughly because any uncorrected error is considered against the interests of the people.
Okay, shifting to how work gets done organizationally. The text uses that analogy of the party committee as a squad.
Right. The party committee system is there to ensure collective leadership, so no single person dominates. The secretary's role is like being a good squad leader. And the methods emphasize openness, place problems on the table, share information, and careful analysis.
And there's that other analogy, the play the piano method. What's that about?
It's about coordination. Think about playing the piano. You need all 10 fingers moving together rhythmically to make music. Similarly, a party committee needs to keep a firm grip on its main central task. Maybe it's boosting steel output. But at the same time, it has to skillfully coordinate all the other related tasks that support that main goal. You need both focus and coordination.
And underpinning all this is a demand for hard data.
Absolutely. Leaders must have a head for figures. Pay attention to statistics, percentages, basic quantitative analysis. The reasoning is simple. Without quantity, there can be no quality. You need the numbers to understand and manage the reality.
Now, the big ideological sin, the opposite of all this discipline, is called liberalism. The book spends a whole chapter outlining what that looks like day to day. How does it manifest?
Liberalism is seen as really damaging because it puts personal comfort or relationships ahead of revolutionary principles. Symptoms include things like letting mistakes slide just to keep the peace with friends, gossiping about problems privately instead of raising them formally with the organization, trying to avoid personal blame, or just working lackadaisically without a clear plan or commitment.
So it's a mix of revolutionary laziness and maybe conflict avoidance.
You could put it that way. The text warns it eats away unity, undermines cohesion, causes apathy, and creates dissension. It basically cripples the discipline needed to win. It's seen as letting bourgeois habits, prioritizing ease, personal connections over the party line, infect the ranks.
This intense focus on discipline and avoiding softness connects naturally to the economic side. Diligence, frugality, and self-reliance. Why is this pushed as such a long-term core policy?
Because it stems from recognizing the basic contradiction China faced. It's a huge socialist country, but still economically backward and poor. Given that reality, the only sustainable path forward, according to the text, is building up our country through diligence and frugality. Every penny, every copper has to be saved and used wisely for the cause, for the economy.
And this isn't just about saving money, is it? It's also a kind of psychological defense.
Exactly. Economically, the focus is on regeneration through one's own efforts, relying on internal hard work and resources, not becoming dependent on foreign help. But politically, maintaining that style of plain living and hard struggle is crucial. It's seen as the way to resist the sugar-coated bullets of the bourgeoisie, the temptations of luxury, comfort, and complacency that could lead straight back to revisionism. Austerity is both economic necessity and an ideological shield.
So wrapping this up, this deep dive into the Little Red Book reveals this incredibly detailed and integrated worldview. It's a system where power initially comes from violence, from the barrel of a gun, but then that power is supposed to be maintained and directed purely through the party's unwavering ideological grip.
Right, sustained by that constant feedback loop of the mass line and fueled by perpetual class struggle.
It really is a total revolutionary operating system, isn't it?
Right.
It defines reality through its own lens, justifies constant conflict as necessary for progress, and tries to ensure loyalty and energy through really strict internal discipline against things like liberalism and bureaucracy.
Yeah, every single piece, from the grand strategy like the paper tiger down to, telling cadres they have to do manual labor, it all serves that general line of the party.
And it's a system that doesn't just accept hardship. It seems to almost require it. We kept seeing warnings about twists and turns and how pessimism or wanting things to be easy are just plain wrong. The whole ideology seems to need setbacks to function, right? To force that second leap of cognition, the correction through practice.
And that brings us right to the core, maybe existential question this text leaves you with. It keeps saying new things always have to experience difficulties and setbacks as they grow, and the ideological struggle is long and torturous. So if stagnation, pessimism, even just comfort are defined as the enemy, as these wrong ideas, what does that imply about the system's need for permanent revolutionary mobilization just to survive?
You mean if the armed enemies are gone and the party manages to root out all the internal ideological enemies, does the whole system then risk collapsing into the exact stagnation and bureaucracy it was built to fight?
It certainly suggests that possibility. Does the revolution have to keep finding or maybe even creating new struggles, new contradictions, simply to keep its own ideological engine running, to avoid becoming that museum piece it predicts for other systems? It seems the only way forward, according to this text, is constant motion, constant struggle, constant correction against external threats, yes, but maybe more importantly, against the internal temptation of just stopping.
A perpetual motion machine of revolution, fueled by struggle itself. A fascinating and profoundly demanding blueprint. Thanks for unpacking this incredibly influential text with us.